Well, there's a whole lot going on in the Middle East, and most of it's tied to Iran. We'll cover all that and more on this episode of The Hot Zone.
This is The Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, thanks for being a part of our podcast. It's growing by leaps and bounds, and I have you to thank for that. Now, please keep sharing and liking it on iTunes and Facebook, SoundCloud, etc. And thank you to our new patrons, the Tomlet family and Steve Kiefer of uselitegear.com. If you want to find the best tactical and outdoor gear on the planet all in one place, US Elite Gear is the place to find it. That's us-elitegear.com. Okay, so things have been escalating in the Persian Gulf region as tensions soar between the U.S. and Iran. I haven't talked about it a whole lot on the podcast because it's kind of been all over the news, and I want to give you guys stuff that's happening around the world that isn't necessarily making the news for whatever reason. But there are a few things happening that pertain to what's going on between the U.S. and Iran that I think you might not have heard about. So let's talk about Iran a little bit today. Last week, a missile was fired by Houthi rebels and struck the arrivals hall of an airport in southwestern Saudi Arabia on Wednesday, injuring 26 people. The footage is pretty spectacular, but not in a good way, especially for that poor dude that was just walking through the door when the missile hit. Definitely ruined his weekend. Amazing nobody got killed in that attack. Now, the Houthis in Yemen are supported by Iran, just another of the many proxies that Iran supports to foment mayhem and misery across the Middle East. Nations support proxies like this so they can strike at their enemies without actually causing a real war that would be extremely costly in lives and treasure. So rather than go to war with Saudi Arabia, Iran supports the Houthis in Yemen, and rather to go to war with Israel, they support the Hamas and Hezbollah in Lebanon and in Gaza. Rather than go to war with the United States, they support over 100 Shia militia groups, those provisional military units in Iraq. And they support the Taliban in Afghanistan. They even support the Maduro regime in Venezuela. So news broke earlier this week that Iran and the Houthi rebels shot missiles at 2 American drones in that area and managed to bring one of them down. The U.S. called it a significant escalation in the region and may have something to do with more U.S. troops that are being sent over that direction by the Trump administration. In another incident, a mortar attack happened on a base in Iraq where U.S. troops are located. Fortunately, nobody got hurt, but this is another likely escalation in that area. Just like neighboring Iran, Iraq is a Shiite majority country, especially when you get south of probably about Kirkuk or so, around Baghdad and further south, extremely Shiite majority country. And so those Shiites have been trying to kind of straddle the fence between Tehran and Washington. And there have been concerns that Baghdad could get caught once again in the middle, just as it is on the path to recovery. They've been trying to make it back from this costly war that's been going on for a decade and a half in that country. But Iran has really extended that war because they've been supporting all the bad people in Iraq to fight against the Iraqi government and against U.S. troops for a long, long time. I mean, when I was there back in 2004, 2005, we saw Iranian-made IEDs that's with explosively formed penetrators. Those are extremely lethal explosive devices that were being shipped in from Iran, made in Iran, and used against U.S. troops. And a lot of U.S. troops died or got maimed because of those Iranian weapons. Now, Iraq hosts more than 5,000 U.S. troops and is home to powerful Iranian-backed militias, some of whom want the U.S. forces to leave, like I said. Now, if the Trump administration wanted to really send a message here, what they'd do is they'd move all U.S. troops to Kurdistan and out of the rest of Iraq. Just open a base in Erbil, close Incirlik in Turkey, close our bases in other parts of Iraq, and move all of the troops to Kurdistan because they are our only friends in the region. And anyway, that's what I would do if I was president and had my way. After the 2 oil tankers that were attacked last week in the Gulf, and now these 2 incidents, it just goes to show that Iran is flexing its muscles and trying to scare the United States. Now, good luck with that. We've used force against Iran before. They tend to talk a big game, but when the missiles start flying, it would literally take about 6 minutes to sink their entire navy. And they know they can't stand up to the United States. So that's why they're funding all these proxies and trying to just maybe annoy us to death, I think. I also think this belligerence on their part shows that the sanctions we've instituted against them are really hurting and having an effect. And we need to keep those sanctions up as strongly as we can. Okay, let's move on and talk about Argentina. A massive power outage happened earlier this week that left almost 50 million people in the dark across Argentina and Uruguay and Brazil and Chile and Paraguay, like 5 different countries. Now, all of them, their power grids are connected. So that was all one big outage. But authorities are calling it abnormal, which, yeah, you think. And they haven't ruled out cyber attacks as the cause for these things yet as they continue their investigation. It is kind of suspicious. And I could imagine a country like China or Russia or even Iran doing something like this with the hopes that the U.S. would figure out that they did it as a kind of warning to the United States without attacking the U.S. directly. We know Russia and China and even North Korea have probed U.S. power networks in the past, and our antiquated power grid would be very vulnerable to that kind of attack. Now, a couple years ago, I made a series of documentaries about the threat of cyber attack against our power grid for NRA TV. Now, I would highly recommend you go there and watch these pieces in their entirety. But I want to show you a little excerpt of some of those documentaries just to give you a sense of what's really at stake.
Electrical power has become so deeply integrated into our lives, most of us rarely give it a second thought until it goes off. The American power grid has been called the largest machine on Earth, but growing demand on an aging infrastructure means the U.S. grid suffers more blackouts than any other developing country. Increased incidents of severe weather do nothing to make things better. Silicon Valley. Many of America's most critical companies are based here. Within their walls work many of America's most innovative people. But the whole thing is based on one simple assumption, that the power will always stay on. But the day after the Boston Marathon bombing 2 years ago, an attack happened nearby that gave many people reason to rethink the things they've always taken for granted. The power substation you see behind me belongs to Pacific Gas and Electric. It's just south of Silicon Valley and provides much of the electricity for that area. Back on April 16th of 2013, right behind me occurred what's been called the most significant domestic terror event on the power grid in history.
There was an outage. A large number of the transformers didn't work, and people woke up to realize that their electricity was off in a lot of circumstances. They figured out that a group of young men had, in a very disciplined fashion, showed up in the middle of the night. They took firing positions with guns that looked somewhat like AK-47s in such a place as to be able to knock out the transformers. And they targeted them one by one, and in a very few minutes had knocked out about 90% of them.
They also knew how to get into an underground tunnel and cut particular communications cables so that they could cut off the transformer substation from the police and fire department, from first responders.
These thick woods are just about 150 yards from the wall of the power substation where the attack took place, and it's most likely that the team of gunmen moved through these woods, this is at midnight, and set up on these knolls, because from here they have a perfect shot over the wall at the transformers that they were filling full of holes with their .30 caliber weapons. This being the spot, they probably were able to get away very quickly and easily, and that's why, even despite a $250,000 reward, no trace has ever been found of the gunman.
The Metcalf incident was a case of sabotage that the North American Electric Reliability Corporation initially tried to cover up and described it as an act of vandalism. This wasn't some kind of amateur job. You know, the U.S. Navy SEALs said that this was a professional job. It's the way they would have done it. You know, they found evidence that there were pre-prepared firing positions. These guys had studied the layout. They knew exactly where to go, and they managed to escape. I mean, the cops showed up on the scene, and these guys just disappeared into the night.
I think the thing that is most disconcerting about this attack on the Metcalf station is just the highly organized nature of the attack. It was accomplished by a group of gunmen firing heavy caliber weapons. They caused over $15 million worth of damage to the transformers that they shot out. But the greater cost just to Pacific Gas and Electric is over $100 million because of the increase in security measures that they have to institute at all of their substations across the board. 7,000 power plants make up 3 large power grids across the United States and are linked together by over 400,000 miles of transmission lines, much of it installed shortly after World War II. Security was a very low priority back then. After all, who would try to take out a power company? But we live in a very different world today. The U.S. grid faces threats both at home, from overseas enemies, and even from outer space. And the power companies are playing catch-up in making their network secure.
You know, 100 years ago, the people that would have been sitting on these very steps eating their breakfast wouldn't have thought it was strange if you had 6 months' food in your basement. But today, that's weird because our just-in-time delivery system allows us to get our food from thousands of miles away every single day. But what that means is that most major cities only have about a 3-day supply of food. So if the system goes down, people start going hungry almost immediately.
All right, so this kind of thing is a big concern for the United States. If you haven't seen the docudrama that National Geographic put out about 2 years ago called American Blackout, you should go watch that one as well. They estimated that a 10-day blackout across the United States would cost something like 400,000 American lives. And if you go and watch that docudrama, it does a really good idea of showing you just how many things would be affected. And it's not just what you think. I mean, it's a lot more than what you think. And what we see is that there's a very thin veneer of civility across the culture in the United States. And all it takes, I've seen this myself, is just a little nudge to make that civility break down. And when it does, look, you don't have to go all doomsday prepper to know this is something you should be prepared for. So give some thought to what you'd need to make it if the electronic payment systems, for example, went offline for a few days or even a few weeks. What would you need for food? I have to tell you, I have seen so many cases as I've covered natural disasters, just localized natural disasters around the United States. Hurricanes like the ones we saw in Florida or South Carolina last year, where people literally don't have enough cash on hand or food in their pantry to feed their families for 24 hours. And so they go crazy when the power goes out and nobody can sell them the food they need or the gas they need to get to the store. They don't keep enough gasoline in their tank to even make it a week without having to fill up. And when you can't use your credit card, people get real desperate real fast. Well, that's all I've got for today, folks. Thank you for watching. As soon as I get done here today, I'm heading for Medellin, Colombia, to do some more reporting on the migrant waves that are coming through there en route to the United States. The U.S. Border Patrol has seen the flow of illegal crossers growing by 30% a month all this year. And if the numbers I'm hearing out of Colombia are true, we haven't even seen anything yet. I was told yesterday by somebody in the know that there are 35,000 migrants making their way through Colombia and hoping to get to the United States before we can get a wall built or get some kind of agreement out of the Congress to stop this illegal flow of migration. Now, Donald Trump announced on Tuesday that he was going to do something big. So by the time you see this on Wednesday, there may be a new announcement out of the Trump administration for how to deal with this problem. But it is a major issue, and I'm going to be reporting on it later on this week and the next. So stay tuned. I'm Chuck Holton, and this has been The Hot Zone.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.